Hello viewers, I am Dr. Susengfa Gogoi, Assistant Professor, Department of Political Science, North Lakhimpur College, Autonomous. You are watching my channel e-Politica. As you all know that this e-Politica channel is about different aspects on political science, and I'm trying to cover different concepts, theories, approaches in political science. So from today, I'm also starting with a series on conversation with different teachers, faculties, researchers from different parts of India, with whom I would talk about different aspects of political science. So I have named this web series as dialogue. So today is the first. This is the first module on dialogue, the conversation, and today's guest with me is Dr. Pankaj Kumar Sharma. He is an assistant professor in political science, Kumar Bhaskar Burma, Sanskrit and Ancient Studies University, Nalbari, Assam. So, in this particular conversation with him, we would talk about what is justice, what is distributive justice, what are the characteristics of his distributive justice, and what is the communitarian critique on distributive justice. So, these things we would discuss. Let us begin. Hello, Mr. Sharma. As you already been informed that we are here today to talk about justice, more particularly on distributive justice. As we know that justice has been considered as one of the most crucial concepts in political science, not in perspective of theory, but also as a also in practice, because justice has been considered as that concept which is considered as one of the most essence of democracy. So, in the light of this, I would like to know from you, like, what is your opinion on justice, or how do you define justice?
Well, today's discussions on different issues regarding justice and more specifically on distributive justice. But at first, as you highlighted about uh, justice, I'd like to throw some light on this particular topic, what exactly this justice signifies. Because this concept of justice is very much important in both theory and practice. Broadly speaking, justice means the fulfillment of the legitimate expectation of the individual and the laws, and to assure him the benefits promised therein. So, this concept of justice is related to the links amongst the human beings. It emphasizes on the concept of equality. It requires that no discrimination should be made among the various members of the society. The justice is considered to be a very important preconditions of the democratic society as well, because without practicing justice, you know, uh, without realizing justice, without doing justice for the people at large, democracy is considered to be a kind of a false assumptions. Democracy cannot be succeeded if there is no proper justice mechanisms. So the justice carries a lot of significance from democratic point of view as well. But not necessarily. The concept of justice has a lot of historical evidences as well. A lot of historical elements as well, because from the ancient times we have different sorts of narratives about the justice mechanism that prevailed in different kind of society historically. The concept of justice deals with moral philosophy. Basically, it deals with moral philosophy, individual concern, and ethical values. So it's become very much clear that morality should be there. While there's a question of justice, the morality must be there. Then it should be individualistic in characters. That means the individual concern, individual benefit. The benefits of each and every human categories are interrelated, and the question of ethical values are also there. So it's a kind of, conglomeration of these three: uh, moral philosophy, individual concern, and ethical values is very much interrelated while we are talking about the justice. If we look at from capitalist perspective, justice is the allocation of goods and free play according to market conditions. That means justice basically talking about providing, the amount of goods uh, that to be very much essential according to the wishes of the individuals. And if they get, that means the justice is there. From communist perspective, justice is allocation of goods according to one's needs. Then again, from legal perspective, justice means punishment for wrongdoings. It also means compensation for those whose rights are violated. It also means the enforcement of rule of law. So from different perspective, we can analyze the concept of justice. If you look at Aristotelian perspective, from Aristotle's viewpoint, equals should be treated equally and unequals should be unequally. And if we are doing so, that means from Aristotle's viewpoint is justice. From Plato's viewpoint, to each his or her due. Then from Marxian viewpoint, from each according to his ability, to each according to his need. So if according to the ability and need of each and every individuals, their the desires, aspirations get fulfilled, that means the justice from Marxian viewpoint. Then from Rawlsian viewpoint, principle of justice pertain to assigning of rights and duties and to the distribution of benefits and burdens of the social corporations. So from this various definition, various analysis, we can summarize about the concept of justice, that simply justice means doing the just distribution of resources, providing the just distribution of resources to each and every individual, facilitate the facilities equally to each and every individual, sometimes depending upon the capacity, sometimes depending upon the needs, sometimes depending upon the merit. But if we analyze the concept of justice from broader perspective, we have to highlight some other issues like the distributive justice, corrective justice, which we need to elaborate in order to make a kind of coherent conclusions about the concept of justice, because this concept of justice is considered to be a very multifaceted concept.
That is indeed a very illustrative discussion by you on what is the meaning of justice. I think our learners have understood what is the meaning of justice. Now, as we all know, that the idea of justice has got different branches. It has got different perspectives. Many people has claimed it as substantive justice. Many people call it as procedural justice. Some people also call it as distributive justice. But among them, the concept of distributive justice has been in wide discussion in political forums and also in political science in particular. Now, could you please highlight on what is your idea about distributive justice?
Well, you have pointed out about the distributive justice. So this distributive justice is considered to be a very crucial issue, a crucial concept, a crucial development in terms of this the concept of justice. And regarding the concept of justice, this distributive justice, it's very much significant. This distributive justice concerns the socially just allocation of resources. In social psychology, this distributive justice is defined as perceived fairness of how rewards and costs are shared by the group members. If we're talking about distributive justice, we have to start with Aristotelian's version of distributive justice. This Aristotle classified the concept of justice in two specific categories, that is distributive justice and corrective justice. According to the principles of proportionate equality, when the justice deals with the distribution of rights, honors, goods, etc. to the citizens, it is called the distributive justice. That means it should be distributed to each and every individuals. Then it can be considered as distributive justice. The scope of distributive justice is wide to the women's rights to franchise or labor's right to better pay and amenities, and the right to vote irrespective of any other qualifications, or the right to form unions. So it's very important that in a democracy, distributive justice should be dispensed by a legislative body, so that it's become more, because the concept of justice is related to the process of the legal process of a particular in a democratic environment. So in a democracy, this distributive justice should be dispensed by a legislative body. But in a non-democratic state, distributive justice is dispensed by the autocratic ruler or body. So it is not like that this distributive justice must be a kind of assets of democratic society. And other sorts of the governmental mechanisms as well, distributive justice can be practiced. Then again, if we analyze the concept of this distributive justice from Rawlsian viewpoint, that means John Rawls is considered to be a social contractualist. In the 20th century, this Rawls starts his analysis with the idea of procedural and substantive justice, while highlighting the issue of this distributive justice. So he starts his assumption with the very specific issues of this procedural and substantive justice. And according to this Rawlsian viewpoint, in case of procedural justice, it is important to determine the principles which is fair. If the criteria is good, then who gets the benefit, that becomes secondary. It must be a kind of just procedure. The procedure must be the equal. It emphasizes on determining just criteria for distributing goods and resources. Then again, on the other hand, if we're talking about the supporters of substantive justice, that emphasizes on beneficiaries. In this case, the procedure is not important. The main beneficiaries should be the poor and discriminated people. So we can say that this procedural justice can be related to the concept of liberalisms, and the substantive justice related to the socialism. This Rawls' greatest book, this Justice and Fairness, and his theory of justice, he elaborated this particular this concept of distributive justice. Today, even when goods are produced, so for example, if we make some sort of critical analysis on this distributive justice, we might find even when goods are produced, but there is scarcity. If there are limited goods and unlimited demands, what should be the criteria of distributions? So to find out solution for this sort of crucial situations, distributive justice mechanisms can be practiced. In an open society, everybody is equal, without restrictions, ability and merit, which plays an important role. But the question arises, should we have special category for special people? In this sense, the debate arises regarding the concept of this distributive justice. He again elaborated his particular concept in his the next step of his the books, that is on political liberalism, and another one is law of the people. So according to Rawls, this good society is composed of many virtues, one of which is justice. Therefore, society is known by its ability to distributive justice. According to Rawls, there are two principles of justice. Number one, each person has an equal claim to a fully adequate scheme of equal basic liberties. And then secondly, social and economic inequalities that must satisfy two specific conditions according to Rawls. Number eight, we can say that they are to be attached to position and offices open to all under conditions of fair equality of opportunity. And number B, that social and economic inequalities must satisfy the condition that they are to greatest advantage of the least advantaged members of the society. So these are some sort of analysis provided by John Rawls. And then again, this Aristotle also highlighted, elaborated the concept of distributive justice as well. But debate arises regarding, the functioning of this distributive justice mechanisms, which also need to be highlighted. So thank you.
So that is indeed a very beautiful discussion on what is distributive justice. As far I have understood from your discussion, that the idea of distributive justice, as you have said, can be considered as a concept of fair distribution of resources, rewards of a nation among the people. So here the procedure is more important when we talk about distribution of resources, and while talking about distribution of distributive justice, we are more particularly talking about the procedural kind of a justice framework, which is mostly related with the idea of liberalism. So that is very well taken. And while talking about distributive justice, you have also highlighted about the Rawlsian concept of distributive justice. So I hope our learners have understood from your opinion. Now, could you please more highlight about what could be the different characteristics of distributive justice? Or let me put it in this way: how do we understand, the nature of distributive justice? How it is different from other forms of justice as well? So, could you please draw a line on it?
Well, after discussing about this distributive justice, the characters of this distributive justice, it also very important, as mentioned. You have already mentioned that about the communitarian critique on distributive justice. So in social science, this critique, this critique always plays a very significant role, and this critique developed as a result of academic discourse analysis. So likewise, in case of distributive justice as well, there is a kind of communitarian critique, how this communitarianism, makes some amount of, their analysis about this distributive justice. So communitarianism, that is considered to be a kind of philosophy that emphasizes the connection between the individual and the community. Its overriding philosophy is based upon the belief that a person's social identity and personality are largely molded by community relationship, with a smaller degree of development being placed on individualism. So the very idea of the debate in terms of the distributive justice, it's revolving around the question of it is the relationship between individual and this community, how the distributive justice mechanism can maintain that particular relationship between this individual interest and this communitarian interest. So on the basis of that analysis, this communitarian critique on distributive justice developed. This communitarian ideal is that the common, it's basically talking about the common good. The communitarian concept of justice is regarded as rooted in, it's basically on Aristotle, moral theory. Is basically focuses his discussion on justice as a part of virtue, which further divides this into this distributive justice and corrective justice. So each of these varieties of justice can be understood to be concerned with achieving equality. So the question of equality is also to be, discussed within that particular, communitarian critique. And the question of value The question of values is also very much significant in the analysis of this, communitarian critique on distributive justice. The value confrontations. The value confrontation is considered, that is between the freedom and autonomy on the one hand, and duty and responsibility on the other. That means the freedom and autonomy of the individual on one point, and on other hand, the duty and responsibility. What kind of duties and responsibility that performed by each and every individual. On the basis of that, the value, the question of value arise. The question of value, the very idea of values develop, and if there is no, if there is no relationship or imbalance, then there must be some sort of contestations. So the debate has serpent, a kind of appreciation of, how the values are underpinned by beliefs about human nature. And in this context, Charles Taylor distinguishes between this advocacy and ontology. By ontology, he means the factors that is recognized as relevant in accounting for social life. Taking an ontological position does not amount to advocating something, but at the same time, the ontological does help to define the options which it is meaningful to support by advocacy. So the very idea of this ontological idea of, this justice, that the very idea of ontology that related with justice, that has been, well elaborated by this Charles Taylor, in terms of, making a kind of communitarian critique on distributive justice. And as a whole, the overall communitarian idea of justice that is closely related to different views on community, state, and the common good. The basic idea of communitarian critique or communitarian, the very idea that basically interrelated with the concept of community, the concept of state, and the common good. How those common goods can distributed or shared to the entire community, whether it should be an individualistic manner or it should be a kind of state-centric manner. That is more important. For communitarians, the community's social functions are also a source of morality. The social order rests on people's interdependence, and society only functions if people recognize and act upon their community responsibilities. So, in terms of this communitarian, in the analysis of communitarian critique of distributive justice, there are some sort of effort provided by effort or made, by this academic discourse analysis in terms of establishing a kind of relationship between the community, state, and the very idea of this common good, whether it should be fairly distributed to each and every individuals, or whether there are some sort of lacking. So that's it.
Okay, so that is indeed again another very well taken points that you have given on different stances on distributive justice. You have talked about how distributive justice can be understood as a fair mechanism of distribution of resources, rewards among people, how the idea of distributive justice is related with the concept of liberalism. Then you also talked about how the idea of distributive justice is connected with the concept of social contractual kind of a tradition, and how the idea of distributive justice is also to be related with the concept of common ownership that has also been discussed. So these are very pertaining points that you have made on distributive justice. But whenever we talk about distributive justice or other forms of justice, there have been lots of criticisms on justice per se. And as you know, that the Rawlsian concept of distributive justice has been criticized from many branches of political science in general and social science in particular. So among them, the communitarians, have been considered as one of the most important critics of John Rawls' concept of distributive justice. So, how do you see the communitarian critique on distributive justice? Please highlight on it.
Well, Again, after discussing about this distributive justice, uh, since you have all again pointed on the characteristics of distributive justice, so on that line, I'd like to highlight some specific instances on distributive justice. Distributive justice, it's basically, since it's basically talking about fair distribution of the resources equally to be available to each and every categories of individuals. So from that point of analysis, liberalism is considered to be one of the specific characters of this distributive justice, because from liberal viewpoint, the justice mechanism, that means that there's a close connection with this liberal principles and the very idea of this distributive justice. Then again, this justice as fairness, it's basically talking about this John Rawls, that basically talking about fair equality of justice, and that based on the very principle of distributive justice, which is entirely depends on the merit, the capacity. But as a whole, it also talking about the equalities as well. Then again, the issues of a social contract, since in all those development that took place in 20th centuries, specifically in the hands of this John Rawls, he was considered to be a social contractualist. So from that point of view, the very idea of social contract, that also plays very significant propositions within the idea of this distributive justice. Then the choice behind the veil, it's basically talking about the very idea elaborated by John Rawls, that is veil of ignorance. So whether you want to engulf yourself within that particular parameters, whether you want something or not, that entirely depends on how you think, how you look at the issues, isn't it? That on the basis of that, you may get something or may not get something. The possibilities of making some amount of profit or losing something, that entirely depends on your choices behind that particular veil. Then equality of resources, I have already spoke a lot on this equalities as well. That also a kind of specific characters of this distributive justice. Then this initial resources, the amount of resources that had, on the basis of that only these distributive mechanisms can be initiated. So the initial resources, the very idea of initial resources, that also considered to be specific characters of this distributive justice mechanism, where the distributive common goods plays a very significant role. So what amount of initial resources are there in terms of practicing distributive justice, there's a close connections. The entitlements, whether by getting that amount of benefits you are really entitled, or you are yet to get entitled, that entirely depends upon the distributive justice mechanisms. On the basis of that, this question of entitlement is also related. Then another issue is that it's like a common ownership. That means since I have already told you about this liberalisms from, and this distributive justice, or the very idea of distributive justice also can be understood from capitalist viewpoint as well. So ownership is also well connected to this concept of distributive justice. But this foremost among all these things, 5 specific issues, 5 specific stances very much common in case of distributive justice. That is equality, equity, power, need, and responsibility. And among these five stances, there are some, along with these five stances, there's some other, specific, characters also lies within, the parameter of this distributive justice. But foremost among them is basically the first one, that is equality. Then second one is this proportionality, and third one is this fairness. These three form the basis of the very idea of distributive justice, because this equality that affects two areas of distributive justice, that is opportunities and outcomes. Whether you get some amount of opportunities, and on the basis of that, how many amount of profit you get, that is, there's a close connections. So equality of opportunity is found when all members of a society are allowed to participate in acquiring goods. No one is blocked from acquiring more goods. Acquiring more goods would be a sole function of will, not because of any social or political reasons. So that is more important. Then again, the equality of outcome is more is considered to be more relative in characters. It does not guarantee that all members of society will receive the same number of goods. It does not guarantee that equal work will produce an equal amount of goods. So the question of equality is more important. A good way to think about equality is that it establishes an equal floor more than equal ceiling. Everyone needs a certain number of goods to survive. Equality ensures that every member of a society has a basic number of goods regardless of how much work they have done. There's a minimum, aspiration should be there. So if this floor is established and there are no limits to the ability of one to acquire goods except for his or her own will, then distributive justice can be said to be present. So this very idea is closely associated with the whole idea of this distributive justice. And then again, this proportionality, that is this proportional, that justice mechanism should be proceed in a very proportionate way, because it should be in a relative term. And since the very idea of distributive justice is basically talking of the fair distribution of resources equally to each and every individual, so proportionality should be maintained, and which are ultimately also talking about the third idea that I have want to highlight, that is fairness. So fair equality of justice. So these are some sort of uh, these are some sort of grounding realities which I would like to highlight in case of specific characters of this distributive justice. So apart from this characteristics of this distributive justice, you can add some more specific features of distributive justice as well. Thank you.
Yeah, so you have very beautifully analyzed the communitarian critique on distributive justice, more particularly saying that the idea of communitarianism or communitarian philosophy in justice has been considered as a very important tool that connect the concept of individual with community. So how the idea of individual and community can be linked up with the idea of communitarian philosophy has been discussed very beautifully. Then you said that the idea of distributive justice is one of the branches of communitarianism, and where communitarianism sees the idea of justice from a value perspective. So you have you talked about the Aristotelian idea of value adoption, and how from that value perspective we can defy the distributive justice perspective, because you said that the idea of value according to Aristotle to be considered as virtuous. So idea of distributive justice may not stand on the value question. So that is what we have understood. Then you also give emphasize on what Charles Taylor had to talk about regarding the ontological understanding of justice. So that is a very well discussed commentary and critique on distributive justice. So I thank you for participating in this first module on distributive justice. I hope our learners have able to understand the idea of distributive justice, its characteristics. Then they would able to understand the critique, communitarian critique on distributive justice. So with this, I signing off today. I welcome you again to this first series on the dialogue with different faculties, teachers, personalities, and researchers on political science. For more updates, please subscribe the channel, press the bell icon, and keep watching e-Politica. Till then, stay home, stay safe. Jai Hind.